We are in Naples today to talk about complexity, and we do this with the Superintendent for Archaeology, Finance and Landscape of Naples, Dr. Luigi La Rocca. What does complexity mean? Well, the old town of Naples, and I would say the city of Naples, is a complex cultural system which is qualified by a multiplicity of components, all organically fused amongst themselves, from the tangible ones, the extraordinary cultural heritage which gives its shape to the city, to the intangible one, which is culture, tradition, ways of living and ways of thinking, which somehow make this city unique. To manage complexity in Naples, in my view, means, and in order to manage this, we need knowledge, the knowledge of this fabric at a range of levels, which allows us to deal day by day with the witnesses of the history of the city, from the most ancient ones, the archaeological ones, because this is a city founded by the Greeks at the end of the 6th century before Christ, which grew without any organic plan, and throughout the various phases it left witnesses up until that of a quite recent past, which is the one bringing us to the contemporary world. Alongside knowledge, there is skill and the multidisciplinary quality of our work, which allows us to intervene in terms of restoration and recuperation of these witnesses through professionals who are highly specialist archaeologists, restorers, architects and art historians, which help us to and contribute to preserve and to translate this extraordinary heritage.
Welcome to the Restoration Week 2021, an annual event, live streaming, conferences, meetings and a discussion about restoration, aiming at promoting a common field of dialogue, a common language in restoration, talking with experts from all over the world. Today we are in an emblematic place, the church, the upper choir of the nuns of the church Santa Maria Donna Regina Vecchia, the old church, a building that have been very, very important in the history of restoration and in the construction of the international regulation of restoration through the participation to the Charter of Athens. But I don't want to anticipate too much, because we will talk about that lately and in detail. As per the introduction of Superintendent Luigi La Rocca, today, and thank you, Superintendent, for hosting us in such a wonderful city. As a superintendent, he is responsible for the whole architectural heritage of the city. We are talking about complexity in a city which is complex for its evolution in time, for the complexity of its cultural heritage, for the social complexity of the city in its evolution, and in the dialogue between the old neighborhood and the new ones. What is the Restoration Week? The Restoration Week is an annual event which is part of a wider project promoted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Italian Trade Agency, aiming at creating the culture of restoration and aiming at promoting Italy as the country who is talking about restoration. Our agenda, as usual, our agenda is very complex and very interesting. Today we are in Naples, and as I said, we are talking about complexity. Tomorrow we will be in Pompeii, and we will talk about value. On Friday the 3rd, we will be in Matera, and we will be talking about ethics. We will go through these three main words, three main topics discussed later and in detail. Another important part of the agenda. These three events are what's the so-called Fuori Salone, so what happened outside the Salone del Restauro in Tour in Bari, which will take place from the 1st to the 3rd of September. And on the 1st of September, we are going to talk about heritage and sustainability. And on the 2nd, we are talking about knowledge for preservation. Two important topics to be discussed at an international level to improve our capacity of dealing with the cultural heritage. Let's come back to the main focus of our Restoration Week, the promotion of the Italian sector, restoration sector abroad, and the creation of a common ground for enhancing the possibility of the Italian experts companies to create partnerships all over the world. We have an important invited delegation from 7 countries from all over the world. The first delegation in presence after the COVID, so we are very proud to be hosting our delegates here. We have 1 partner country, which is Albania, and 6 project countries, which are Azerbaijan, Cuba, Croatia, Lebanon, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. What does we mean when we are talking about project country? That means that those countries are part of the promotional system of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, and that means that we have already started a common project of promotion, or we are going to start a new project within a short time. So the Restoration Week is the opportunity to meet each other, talk about our future cooperation, and talk about cultural heritage in a common language. Let's talk about our promotional system, the Restauro Made in Italy project, through the words of the President of the Italian Trade Commission, Carlo Ferro. Let's see the video.
Good afternoon. The Restoration Week is celebrating and promoting restoration and protection of cultural heritage in this period of restart. Our companies have combined a strong craftsmanship identity and the innovative capacity and ability of our entrepreneurs with the update of know-how. That is why Italian companies and firms are pioneers in techniques of restoration and conservation. We offer a know-how that is appreciated all over the world. It offers the possibility to promote the local cultural heritage and creates value. Value is the very topic of this day works. We also have a documentary on Pompeii that is a symbol of Italian excellence. Promoting restoration abroad means transmitting an image of made in Italy in the world that is multifaceted. It has a story of culture, traditions, quality, techniques, innovation and sustainability, strengthening the perception of the excellence of made in Italy. And this is why for over 15 years, the Italian Trade Agency, together with Asso Restauro, and I want to thank President Pozzetti, promotes these features abroad as unique features of our country and our firms and companies. So we do it synergistically with the other stakeholders in our country in a joint effort that is also based on the network of our 78 offices in the world, together with the network of the embassies, the Institute of Cultures, and the agencies of cooperation with which the Italian trade agencies has recently signed a protocol of cooperation. And in this framework, we have the project Restoration Made in Italy, aiming at strengthening this sector for all the companies that offer the capacity of carrying out complex projects abroad. There are projects ongoing in many countries, Saudi Arabia, Azerbaijan, Israel, Lebanon, Turkey. I want to greet all the delegates of all these countries, and I conclude by wishing that our firms can find more and more space also on foreign markets, as the know-how and the ability of Italian craftsmen and entrepreneurs deserve. Thank you and enjoy this visit.
Thank you, President Ferro, for having introduced us in the focus and the reason for this Restoration Week. In the field of restoration, we have always cooperated with the Italian Trade Agency to promote our industry, experts, professionals, companies, but the main focus of our promotion have always been the creation of a common language and the training on both sides. Our expertise are mainly related to the methodologies, technologies, and materials, but we need the expertise from the other countries to be able to make a right interpretation of the restoration. So there is no selling and buying, but there is a comparticipation, and the partnership is the word that's the secret of our activity, and that's why we are promoting the Restoration Week as the event to start dialoguing with the new country. But let's come back to this building, and let's come back into the history of restoration. As I said, we are inside a very complex and a very important building, and I thank you, Professor Renata Piccone, for hosting us here in this place, in the headquarters of the Postgraduate School of Architecture for the Architectural and Landscape Conservation. Professor Piccone, thank you for hosting us here, and why this building is so important.
I am extremely happy that the Restoration Week starts from this place, from the 14th century Church of Donna Regina, because on top of hosting the School of Specialization in Architectural Heritage and Landscape, which I direct, it is a symbolic place of the historic restoration tradition in Italy. The 14th century Church of Donna Regina, where we are now, has been restored in 1926 by Gino Chiarici, the superintendent. He also was a teacher in a restoration school. So he intervened very significantly to restore and actually improve both the 17th century church of Donna Regina, the one that stands in front, but also the medieval church, because during history, when the 17th century church is built, the one which is now hosting the Museo Diocesano of Naples, and I would like to thank the Museo for their collaboration and for allowing us to use this space. So the 17th century church actually overtook the medieval church, destroying parts of the apse as we see here, and this has led to a slow deterioration process of this incredible structure, which in the meantime had become the Naples Town Hall. And this, of course, created many problems to the decorations and the architectural structures. After the discovery done by the French researcher Émile Berthaud at the beginning of the 20th century. All the Giotto frescoes that we can see here were discovered, and there's a beginning of restoration which had been shown by Gino Chierici to the so-called International Charter of Restoration of Athens of 1931, which discussed all the opportunities and the criteria that Gino Chierici applied in this extraordinary restoration work, which allowed to recover the medieval space, but also the space of the 17th century church. This is the reason why we are extremely happy that we can begin the Restoration Week from this symbolic place of the Italian Restoration. And this is the reason why we work to stay as School of Specialization in Architectural Heritage and Landscape, firmly rooted in these spaces, which represent maybe much better than any theoretical lecture the potential that the Italian Restoration has within itself and its traditions, and also that it can apply anywhere in the world in similar cases.
We have been talking about making decisions, so to take the decision to divide those two churches was a great challenge, but sometimes those challenges comes to be part of the international debate in the restoration. But we are also talking about technologies, because in 1934 it was very, very difficult to find the way to move entirely a wall, saving an important wall, mural decoration like the one we have and we will see in the next clip. But it is important to have people trained in restoration. That's why the rule of the school, the postgraduate school in architecture and landscape conservation is so important. Professor Piccone.
The School of Specialization in Architectural Heritage and Landscape is something specific to Italy. We actually have 9 of those in Italy. The Naples School is the second after Rome by age. This year we are 52 years old. So we've been working for 52 years. So we have a very strong tradition. First and foremost, because these specialization schools, which actually come after the main education, so as a third level education after a master degree in construction, civil engineering, or architectural engineering, or architecture, or archaeology,
history of art or conservation. The 5 specialties of 5-year graduates that we offer to third level specialization on restoration. It is a multidisciplinary education, and we were talking about complexity. Cultural heritage is one of the most complex elements. They require a multidisciplinary approach, and this is why since 1969 in this school we have been teaching architecture, restoration, geology, petrography, town planning, and regulation and legislation for cultural heritage, management of cultural heritage, and aspects related to the geology of sites that cannot be separated by engineering aspects. And with structural engineers, in Naples there is a famous school of engineering. Since 1969 we have been working on the theme of structural consolidation of monuments, because the old name of this school is restoration of monuments, and the etymology of the word monument is moneo, means memory. Now we talk about heritage that is connected with the idea of value, and cultural heritage is now the contemporary definition. Anyway, going back to what I was saying, this school is a multidisciplinary school, and in this school We have a tradition of studies on structural consolidation that doesn't betray the values of the old buildings. Structural improvement, yes, but that is not in conflict with our main goal, that is the conservation and preservation of the heritage and the transmission of the value of the monuments to the future. So, structural consolidation, yes, without giving up the values. And this is the lesson we learned from the masters of the school. Di Stefano, for instance, Professor Di Stefano taught us the importance of knowledge, also the historical knowledge, to fully understand the structural solutions to improve the cultural and architectural heritage in the world. Cultural heritage is always international. I've just been in Barcelona and also in other countries. We find supranational cultural heritage, and this is why we appreciate the initiative of the Restoration Week taken by Asso Restauro that involves colleagues from foreign institutions on the issue and the theme of restoration made in Italy that Mr. Ferro was alluding to in his presentation.
About restoration, and we will see some of those terms during these days. Now we can enter in detail into the restoration of this building with the Professor Luigi Veronese, an expert, a passionate of the Chierice's restoration. Let's see the video.
This is the 14th century church of Donna Regina, which was built by Karl of Anjou when an earthquake destroyed a church already existing here, and a new church was built. The wife of Karl of Anjou, Mary of Hungary, desired the build of this, and she is buried here in the apse. Built by Tino da Camena. This is a single apse with a ribbed vault, and it was impossible to build the choir of nuns behind the apse, and this forced the architect to identify the solution of building it above this basilical space which you see on the ground floor, which was supported by this bay arched with a groin vault. The most important refurbishment took place in 1620 when the nuns decided to carry out a new church which was more appropriate to the fashion of the time. The project was thanks to Giovanni Guarini, and the new church had to exist in the same space before the archbishopric where the square of Donna Regina is. The impossibility of invading that space because it belonged to the archbishop imposed a building of the church which was longer than the space by invading the apse of the 14th century. This is why this church was completely forgotten, and the floor that divided the choir from the nave was extended to the apse, and it was used only as a choir area, which became part of the convent, whereas this space in which we find ourselves now becomes a warehouse. Up until at the end of the 19th century, the historian Emile Berthaud, who visited the south of Italy, solicited a restoration of this monument in order to recover the frescoes of the 14th century in the choir. These works took place in 1928 thanks to Chierici, who was the superintendent from 1924, who at that point began to free up the entire building. We find ourselves in the choir of the Church of Donna Regina Nuova. This is the wall with the fresco of Solimena, which was moved by Chierici in 1932. The wall invaded the apse of the 14th century church, and it needed to be moved, and it could not be detached in a traditional way because Solimena, when he was young, had used some tempera colors. This is why we cannot detach in the traditional way, and therefore it was decided to move the entire wall to free up the apse of Donna Regina Vecchia. This is a very limited and difficult operation which takes place through the thinning of the wall, which is then supported on the other side by reinforced cement, which is then covered with various levels of tarred paper and a wooden bracing structure which allows the wall to be in line with reinforced concrete. Then 7 rails were put in position in order which were organized in order not to be squashed once the wall moves along, and this wall was moved by roughly 6 meters from the position it was before within the apse of Donna Regina Vecchia to the current position which you see at this time. The operation lasted about 45 minutes and in fact is filmed by television by the Istituto Luce, which witnesses this change.
Making decision and find the right technologies to read a proper restoration, as we see in this clip, is one of the most important aspects of the restoration. Sometimes those decisions are involving the international community, as happened to the Chierici's restoration for the participation to the Athens Charters. ICOMOS is one of the most important organizations in the world, which is aiming at preserving and conserving the cultural heritage and promoting the use of the proper methodologies in restoration and preservation of historical, architectural and archaeological building. Eran Morovic, an architect and the director of the board of ICOMOS in Israel. You've been involved in several restorations in your life, and in a country in which complexity is a word that we can use, at least. How can you define complexity in your experience?
So thank you, and thank you for the complex question. I think complexity is divided to many levels. So first of all, it's the narrative. If we look at our experience from Israel, it's first of all, how do you curate the past? Which decision you take on which past to keep? Because the one you keep, it means maybe the other one is not kept. And it's also, of course, a political question. And as you mentioned, it's always a complex and sensitive decision. And therefore, we have to look on how ethical we are in this field. So this is maybe the highest level. And then comes the level of the legal system. For example, in Israel, we don't have a very strong legal system which lasts already for some years, and therefore it brings challenges to, again, to what you conserve, how do you conserve it, and how is the state is involved. Many of the conservation initiatives in Israel are done, let's say, voluntarily or by the private market, which means many things are not getting enough funds, let's say. So that also brings the complexity of how do you conserve everybody's heritage. And we have another complexity, and I think it was mentioned also about Napoli, is how do you conserve historic cities, which are living cities, with different kind of populations. I can bring Tel Aviv as an example for a city which has a lot of economical potential and therefore also conservation, as well as Akko, which is a much poorer city, and the residents there need much more support. And how do you conserve urban conservation is also a very complex question which we have to deal in Israel and I think in other places. And the last is probably the question of materials. Sometimes, for example, much of Israel heritage, let's say modern heritage, seems to be concrete and kind of plaster buildings which are looks like easier to conserve, but actually behind the plaster there is a lot of very delicate concrete structures. We have just spoken with Gina today, and it is a complex technological challenge to understand how to conserve, for example, concrete brutalist buildings, which are coming more and more to the awareness. And the last but not least is the seismic region we are in Israel. We are also, like in Italy, we are in a seismic region, which brings engineering challenges. So I think it gives a picture of complexity.
Thank you, Aaron. You get a lot of good points, and complexity is similar probably all over the world. We have similar problems. You have a different way of financing the cultural heritage, and that's very, very interesting because it's very different from Italy. In Italy, mainly the financer of the restoration is the public, the government or the institution, also through the European and international fundings, but it's really an interesting position. Another point, materials, technologies, is the key point of our Restoration Week and a way to share our competencies in the field of restoration to be able to use the right materials in the right position. Of course, a material built in Italy probably is not so efficient in Israel, but sometimes we can use our technologies to help. Another important aspect that you have highlighted is the restoration of modern buildings, so different materials, concrete, and that's uniting more and more our common methodologies and the use of material. But another important aspect, for example, of the restoration here in Donna Regina was the technology at the time used for moving a wall. So sometimes you need to find out the technology taken from other sector and other places. I know that in Israel you have been moving some houses in the German Templar colony of Sarona. How was this experience?
Well, I think indeed, first of all, you have to have this complex question of shall I move any immovable assets? It's not in situ anymore, so we have this kind of ethical question. Once you pass that and you know that this is the last resort to conserve, for example, Sarona, there was a need to balance between the development of the roads or infrastructure and to keep those buildings in their kind of urban context. And this of course, pushed to the solution of moving some of the buildings which were the most adjacent to the road, and they were moved one by one, few meters, but few meters to move a building is as complex as to move it 100 meters. So, and so few of the buildings were indeed raised up on a sort of a truck system and were moved some meters to the south, so the road could be widened a bit, and though have this whole area developed. This technique since that was used a little bit more in other buildings which were taken apart, and then a high-rise was built, and then a building was reinstalled underneath. So yes, technology is being used in that way, but again, these are ethical decisions, and then they become the technological challenge which we need to face.
Thank you, architect. I perfectly agree with you. So the choice at the beginning is the key point. So can we move those buildings or not? Or if we have, we need to find a way. Very interesting. Thank you very much. Let's jump now to another important and complex building in Naples, the library and monumental complex of the Gerolamini. A huge complex in dimension, a wide complex for the evolution in time. We were talking about the stratigraphy of a building, the layers that are adding in time. And here we have not only layers, but buildings, changes, demolition, and reconstruction. A great investment taken from the international funding, the local government, to make the valorization of this important complex in Naples. So complexity assumes another declination, as Eran was saying, also the management, and Professor Piccone also were talking about the management of the building, which now is the center of our policies for the restoration of the cultural heritage, common building, modern building, or monument, whatever it is. Let's enter into the complex of Gerolamini, the complexity of his history and the complexity of its management. Let's see the video.
This is the house of complexity. The history is complex, and the sense that it has given itself during the centuries is complex in this heart of the historic center of Naples. The Gerolamini complex stays on exactly 2 insulas of the town, first Greek and then Roman, of Naples, and has been inhabited from the Greek period until the first decades of the 17th century, when the Gerolamini fathers acquired the land on which it sits. In 1586, when the Oratorians arrive in Naples, in a brief period of time, supported by the bishop and the aristocracy, they are literally able to conquer a piece of the historic center, creating a building from an architectural point of view, which is extremely important and which calls for the help of many masters of the Roman and Florentine culture who integrate with the Neapolitan school. This is the place where is born one of the first public libraries, and this mission of giving back knowledge to the proximity community is a characteristic of the Oratorian community throughout the whole period of their stay here in the historic center. Well, in 1727, when the library already had a large number of very important volumes, the Gerolamini decide to buy the Giudetto Valletta collection. Giudetto Valletta was an erudite who, during his life, had put together not just the cornerstones of philosophy, law, and ancient history, but also sculptures, ancient vases, epigraphies. That collection ran the risk of being wasted by his heir. So Giambattista Vico, who was a regular frequenter of the library, suggests the Oratorian to buy this collection. So they do that and they avoid its waste. Right now, the library and the monumental complex of the Gerolamini is undergoing a comprehensive project for roughly 18 million euros of value through 3 functional lots which depend on different financing. The development program wants to recreate a cultural hub which is within a cultural circuit for the town, but also at an international level. The three functional lots concern the whole complex and are being carried out all together. The first lot of work, for an economic value of 4 million, depends on a financing which is managed by the municipality of Naples and sits within the big project of the historic center of Naples. The work concerns the main facades. The second lot is for the monumental spaces of the church, in particular the decoration of the left side nave of the church, the chapels, the apse and the transept. The third work lot is concerning right now the library spaces with restoration interventions of the monumental rooms. We started by dividing the building site in many smaller building sites to allow the public to still access the library.
Nowadays, valorization, as we was saying, is the center of our policies in the restoration of cultural heritage. Enhancing the performances of our historical building is one of the most important challenges that we are facing for the future. The Italian Code for the Protection of Cultural Heritage is aiming exactly at that, pushing all the Italian institutions and operators to verify and valorize their buildings. But when we are talking about buildings, performances are a strange word to be used. We are talking about program maintenance to defend our building from the use, because using a building means creating a degradation, the anthropic degradation. But we need to be our monuments to be alive, the capacity of attracting people and be more involving to the people, using the new technologies, the new media, and so on, are all challenges for creating value on our cultural heritage. Italy is working on that field to enhance the cultural tourism since a long time, but all over the world, many countries are working on that field. Saudi Arabia is one of the countries who is pointing a lot on its cultural tourism and its cultural heritage. What's the situation now? Okay, it's open. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Doctor. And just before answering your question, I want to say thank you for Italy and the ministry, the organization, the Restoration Week team, you and the wonderful team with you. And we are honored to be a project country guest, and hopefully we will expand our cooperation the next year and maybe in a different format, inshallah. Just answering your question, I want to share with you how we define our way of treating our cultural heritage assets. And as you know, there is a very famous business model. It is used in engineering and business, and we apply it in heritage management, which is the value chain. Some of you heard about this model, which is mainly three major components. The first one starts with finding and discovery. So we are now doing a lot to find and document and research existing or a non-existing building that we are discovering. And second phase will be how to protect and maintain these assets. And finally, how to activate and maybe invest or market and use. So if we think about these two, this is our part of our, if we think about these three phases, then we are, just to give you some highlight, and we'll explain more on Thursday during our workshop, that we are doing great in the first one. We are doing great work in documentation. I have with me Salim, Engineer Salim, and they developed over the last few years the National Registrar for Cultural Heritage, and they register already 1,000 assets, and in the archaeology they register more than 8,000, Dr. Ajab and his team. And we are starting to do something good in the restoration, and this is the reason that we are here. We think we have a big challenge in Saudi Arabia where we have the need and we have the huge market, but there are few entities and standards and education programs for restoration. And this is the reason that we discussed last night the education aspect, the certification aspect, how to improve companies. We have few. We have RFPs that are sent and nobody respond to these RFPs because simply we have very few number of companies that will do exactly what we want. So this is the reason that we are here. Of course, the third phase looks easier, which is activating the building, because we are doing fine and we have a lot of partnership with other ministries, so we are not really very worried. We are worried about the middle phase, which is the restoration and protection of the building, and this is the reason that we are extending our hand to top countries worldwide, of course, among them Italy in the restoration. We have talked with other countries, but we like to start something as soon as we can, especially under the umbrella of the Saudi-Italian Memorandum of Understanding just signed, I think, last month. So we are in the right time, the right place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Of course, I can speak on behalf of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Italy is ready to help Saudi Arabia in this particular challenge, and mostly our industry of restoration is ready to help to grow a similar industry in Arabia, to create partnership and to work together to create a new cultural asset, landscape, or a new cultural identity of your country. But Saudi Arabia is rich in archaeological site, and we will talk about that tomorrow in Pompeii. But of course, Saudi Arabia is rich in history also in its cities. Modern architecture, common building, which are creating the surroundings of your capital city or the main cities of your country. So also this building are part of the creation of a national identity. So is the ministry also focusing on that building?
Yeah, actually, as we discussed also last night, this is the big challenge, because we are not worried very much about archaeology work. We have the tools, we have the knowledge, and all archaeology sites are protected. Mainly, I think 90%, 95% is owned by the ministry and protected. Our big challenge is the culture built heritage sector, because it's all of them are inside cities, some city centers, and it overlaps with infrastructure work, with metro, with highways, with businessmen like to build high buildings that they want to demolish. So this is the big challenge, and we are currently, as we speak, as Salim knows, we are developing a project in downtown Riyadh, and you will see when you visit, and we have our sister organization developing a major restoration in Jeddah, historical Jeddah, and we have other areas, but mainly in Riyadh and Jeddah and Taif and Mecca. These are the major cities that have we call it the Saudi built heritage items, where buildings that are aging maybe 200 years or less, mainly from the Saudi state or other businessmen who own this building. So this is really the big challenge, and this is the challenge that we need help. We are doing fine in archaeology, but we need help in built heritage. That is the message that we want to deliver today.
And again, thank you, Bish. Again, Italy is ready to give you the help that we can. We will talk about archaeological sites again tomorrow in Pompeii. Thank you again, and let's come back to the Gerolami complex, monumental complex, to go into the heart of the complex, the library, precisely into the Sala Vico, which is under restoration at the moment, and visiting Sala Vico is impressive because it's a real surprise. We are used to try to understand from a distance materials degradation, but when you enter into the Sala Vico, you are facing a huge vault on the ground floor. The idea is that probably is a fresco vault, but when you have the opportunity to go closer, you can get some surprise. So let's see this surprising restoration in the next video.
The Vico room that you see behind me, today has big scaffolding up until the ceiling and panels covering up the precious volumes of the library and the heart of the Girolamo Library, which is founded in 1586 and which is also the heart of the restoration of the decorations, which in Italy need a specific certification. From the bottom level of the floor up until the ceiling, the decoration seems austere but also extremely precious. It's projected by Arcangelo Guglielmelli and was completed between 1723 and 1727, and it is full especially of this incredible library, which is built to give durability but also beauty to the complex with the essence of walnut wood of Benevento. The restoration works want to keep the balance of the sides, because what the decoration in the room is so uniform, so even, that the difficult job is to find the balance on the different works so that no style surpasses the other, because the main thing of the room is to give it back its function, which already in the original plan, while having such an important decoration, shouldn't surpass any level, any style. So we will keep the importance of a function by intervening with operations of an extreme balance, so that no style, no level of decoration surpasses the function of the room itself. Ethos is carrying over the restoration of the decorative surfaces of the Girolamo Library. It is restoring both the frescoes decorations and the canvas decorations. It is a canvas of over 300 square meters, which is made in a specific way with an execution technique made of strips of roughly 1 meter wide, overlapping on the edges and placed lengthways on the whole surface. For this operation, we have created a system which is similar to the restoration of tapestry than the restoration of a classic canvas. And indeed, all the nails, which have gone through more oxidation and can no longer support the canvas, will be replaced by stainless steel screws, and the surrounding stuccos will be made with a cotton screen, and then after will be covered by Japanese paper to be then touched up. We are dealing with the restoration of the frescoes. Right now we are doing the first operation, which is the pre-reinforcement. This operation allows us to review the scales, which are lifted from the paintings, and the reinforcement of the depths. After this first operation, we will then clean and extract the salt, and then afterwards we will be able to apply the stuccos and to reinforce the surface depths. The last operation that we will carry over is the reintegration of the colors in the gaps and the reinforcement of the surface of the painting.
Surprises are common for the people who are working in restoration. That's a very interesting surprise, because more than 400 square meters of canvas painted, sticked to a roof made of wood, so a false ceiling covering a huge room. When you are from a distance, it's just a decoration. When you are close to the artifact, you can understand the complexity of the restoration you will be facing. And that's what Professor Piccone was saying before. The knowledge before the restoration is the key word for starting a good restoration. Inquire, talk with the building and try to understand its soul, the problems, and gives you the opportunity of making the right choices. As a similitude, just to jump from one side to the other, but just to show how the word of restoration is wide, we can just see a short video of a restoration of a tapestry, something similar to what we saw, but with the difference that with this tapestry it was possible to make a detachment of, to remove, sorry, the tapestry from the site, transport into a laboratory, and then there in peace make the restoration. Not a easier work, because you can see that the work of restoration of such artifacts is really, really delicate and complex, moving big values, as what we are seeing is very difficult and important, making inquiry, making looking at the details you are working on and making all the reparation is very, very complex, as we saw. But we wanted to show that to make a similarity, because in the restoration in Gerolamo Palace, we were working on a canvas, here on a tapestry. The difference is that in the Girolamo Palace, the restorer were working facing up, and here the restorer at least had the possibility to work carefully in the laboratory, but with very nice technologies, materials, and of course skills, because the skill of the restorer is the secret of a good restoration. Let's move now, let's see, just to finish this part of the video, and let's move now to another complexity in the heart of Naples, the Church of San Giovanni in Carbonara, another place completely, another building completely absorbed by the surrounding, by the buildings that surrounds the church, and the building that has complexity as the only word that can define it, both in terms of evolution, new building, how it was built in time, and superficie, so what was built over the other. Every time you turn a corner into the Church of San Giovanni in Carbonara, you are changing the perspective, you are changing the place, you are changing the building, and a new scenario is opening in front of you. For example, in the video that you will see later, it seems to be in front of the main facade of the church, but entering the church, you realize that you were facing the lateral entrance of the transetto, while the main facade is hidden behind other building and other stories of the city in which the church is living. Let's take a look to the Church of San Giovanni in Carbonara.
We are in San Giovanni a Carbonara, one of the most complex and layered churches within the Neapolitan churches, which, starting from the 15th century, undergoes many layers in different periods of times, enriching itself with aristocracy chapels and extraordinary examples of sculptures and painting. It is undergoing right now a restoration operation after a plan which has been financed by the public authorities in Naples, and the plan wants to act on some of the important issues for conserving the church. This building has undergone many transformations and many restoration interventions, especially after the bombing of 1943, and it's been subject to the phenomenon of de-restoration, meaning that all the additions were taken off to take it back to its supposed original state. The restoration intervention were done also more recently, with some operations which, from a technological point of view, require now higher maintenance. We will pay particular attention to the restoration of the fair-faced tuff in Naples, tuff is a volcanic material which is extremely important for the city because it represents really the ego of the Neapolitan architecture. However, it deserves a specific protection, especially when it is not covered by the layer of, let's say, sacrifice of plaster. So this stone, even today, is struggling to find specific measures of cleaning and protection. And so we will experiment with a series of nanotechnology and technologies which we hope will definitely find a solution for the conservation of specific materials within the Neapolitan context.
Clearly, before beginning all these operations for the restoration of the complex, there was a preliminary investigation stage starting from the plaster, where we made some section studies and deflectrometry, and we found this was the old plaster, and therefore with the superintendent we decided to recover the old plaster, and following a cycle of biocide in order to avoid, to kill off all microorganisms, we consolidated with ethyl. And as you can see, we covered this, we covered the old plaster with a lime version, which is compatible with the original. The specificity of this was the recovery and the restoration of the stone elements, including the Paperno stone, and one criticality was found on the Paperno of the Deboli chapel due to the presence of salts due to the air chamber between tufa and Paperno, and also air and humidity. This interest is not only for the plaster but also the yellow tufa from Naples. Specifically for what concerns the tufa rock, the work took place as follows. First of all, a washing, as we see, with demineralized water and broom brushing, and then we continued with a biocide application which eliminates the colonies of microorganisms which form and attack the Paperno rock.
Every step you take in the Church of San Giovanni in Carbonara is a surprise, a positive surprise and a positive challenge for the designer, the architect specifically, and the restorer during the restoration process, studying before the evolution in time of the building, the so-called vertical stratigraphy, the set of analysis and diagnostics needed to understand and correctly read both materials and degradation is the key for a good restoration, as Professor Piccone was saying before. We are now jumping to another phase of complexity just outside Naples, and we want to talk about the urban growth of the surrounding areas of the capital city. So not only the complexity of the city center, but all the surrounding areas. We get the opportunity to talk about that because we are going to visit next the Villa Galdi in Marigliano. But what is interesting now is understanding what is the context around Naples, the reconstruction, the post-World War, Second World War reconstruction, and the reconstruction or growth of the villages and the cities during the economical boom of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. What's the situation in the surroundings?
So far, we have spoken about huge architectural complexes and huge monuments. Now we will focus on one other aspect of complexity and cultural heritage. It is an issue relating a very precious cultural heritage that also qualifies areas built around the large city of Naples. There are many families have buildings that were built around the city. The royal palaces, because the Bourbon kings had hunting places and royal palaces and Vesuvian villas and the Venetian villas, the Sicilian villas, the areas of Bagarias. They are enclaves of cultural heritage spread, scattered over the territory. And Villa Galdi it represents an example of restoration that concerns a building that can be an opportunity of regeneration for an extra-urban territory. This is also another goal of restoration. It is a level of development and of regeneration for areas that are not very rich. They can be places that can also increase the sense of identity, and it is the case of Villa Galdi in Marigliano. We have talked about cross-secting approaches, restoration seen from the point of view of architects and restoration specialists, but also by other specialists, because restoration improves if it is based on a multidisciplinary approach. We can involve experts of architecture, experts of restoration, of decoration, and in the case of Villa Galdi, it is interesting to understand how important it was as a possibility to regenerate and requalify an area. That area was completely devastated by the bombs of the Second World War. Naples and its surroundings were bombed during the Second World War. It is one of the areas that was the victim of many airstrikes, and was also devastated by the building speculation during the 60s. There was an abuse, an invasion of the territory that altered the relationship with the natural environment. In that area, in the area of Marigliano, because of all these factors, this relationship had been altered. In Campania, there was also another period where this phenomena took place after the earthquake of 1980. There was a reconstruction plan, and the reconstruction works didn't really respect the relationship with the context, with the landscape, with the agriculture context. All these monuments, these buildings are delicate and are based on a relationship with the landscape. And this is what happened in the surroundings of Naples. In the case of Villa Galdi, the restoration work was based on a multidisciplinary approach with specialists in restoration and the involvement of landscape architects also, and there were also other professionals who were involved to turn this restoration into an opportunity.
Restoration as an opportunity, not only in Italy, but all around the world for let's grow our economy in a most aware way. So to be aware of what happened, and restoration is awareness. So our restoration means being able to do the right thing in the right place. Thank you very much, Professor. We are now jumping into the restoration of Villa Galdi and starting to taking a site to the surrounding area from the terrace of the Villa Galdi, trying to explain the context in which we are working. Let's see the video.
Marigliano Villa Galdi has for centuries represented the calling card for all those foreigners who came to Marigliano from Naples, and the goodbye to those leaving the area. This large, imposing edifice west of the old turn of this old village in the province of Naples, without the walls, as it were, until the second half of the 20th century, was around the fiefdom of the Mastrigli Duchy. This building, which was in the old town until the first half of the 19th century, moves towards the Via Regia, the now called Corso Umberto I, the main axis of the nobles of the time, and it is along Via Regia that also Villa Gaudi is placed in a context which until the beginning of the 1900s was mainly rural, with few other dwellings and few other homes, mainly farms and farmhouses, until the end of the 60s of the last century. The urban town plan changes radically, also due to an unreasonable urbanization, and it's correct to say that the building of new edifices and home have smothered Villa Gaudi as many other identity monuments of the city, which de facto today are monades which still exist among modern buildings.
Hidden treasures within a context that have been growing since the half of the last year without a precise strategy, following economical or rules or speculation, with some mistakes for the reconstruction under the seismic event on the 80s, as Professor Piccone was saying before. So many factors that are intervening to create an area, a social area, and a landscape. Another urban context that have been heated by a big explosion a little bit more than 1 year ago, the 4th of August 2020, is Beirut. A huge explosion in the port has almost changed the face of the entire city. Falhat Daguerre, Beirut Heritage Initiative. How is the situation after 1 year in Beirut now?
The situation, actually, Beirut was not destroyed. The heritage of Beirut and the fabric was not destroyed really only by this huge explosion. It was destroyed also by 30 years of crazy development and economical expansion without any planning from the government, due to corruption, due to the fact that all the political parties were also involved in development, in real estate development. And so up until today, heritage, built heritage, is not protected by any measure in Lebanon. Now, of course, the explosion in Beirut was another catastrophe because it hit mainly all the areas where the biggest density of heritage buildings were existing, and those buildings were inhabited. So it's not just that heritage buildings were hit, it's really the social fabric of the city that was violently destroyed in this catastrophe, adding up with an economical crisis and a political crisis, which leads us a year down the road to a situation where very little has been done. Awareness is on the way. However, up until today, the corrupt political system is still in place. The economical conditions are still also very, very difficult. And we are striving. There are only NGOs on the ground. People are not yet back to their homes. And NGOs are trying to fundraise and work on the ground. There are little actions that have been done, positive actions. We will talk about it on Thursday, probably in Bari. But of course, we hope that within the next 2 to 3 years, things will evolve in a positive way.
Okay, let's have a look now to a contribution, an important contribution that you take to us, and then we will talk again about that topic. Let's see the video.
الانفجار قضى على أجزاء كاملة من المدينة، البعض منها تدمر كلياً والبعض جزئياً. بهذا السياق في أكثر من 600 مبنى تراثي أثري تراثي تدمر جراء انفجار 4 آب. بعض المباني التراثية تعود إلى الحقبة العثمانية، يعني انبنت قبل 1930. بعض القصور انبنت بالقرن التاسع عشر، وأيضاً عنا يلي بنعتبره من التراث العمراني أو المعماري الحديث، يعني المباني يلي تعمرت بين 1930 و 1970.
Our heritage was severely damaged by the blast, and we had to do something to preserve it and safeguard it. We had regrouped multiple NGOs that have worked on heritage preservation in the years prior, like the National Heritage Foundation and Save Beirut Heritage. We also have the orders of engineers and architects on our side. And from that point on, we started working in close coordination with Beirut Built Heritage Rescue, which was the crisis cell of the Directorate General of Antiquities.
تراث بيروت المعماري هو مثل نسيج الاجتماعي تبع بيروت، مختلط فيه عدة موديلات معمارية ترجع للفترة العثمانية، للفترة ما بين الحربين العالميتين، وللفترة الحديثة ببيروت يلي هي من بعد الاستقلال لحديث 1970. المباني تبع هالفترة الزمنية اللي هي بتتراوح على 100 سنة من تاريخ المدينة مهمة كتير، لأنه نسيجها الاجتماعي بعده عايش فيها. مهمة كمان لأنه هي عم تعطي طابع لبيروت.
At the BHI, we made it our objective and our goal to rebuild this architectural layer. After the blast, we surveyed several buildings, and we are currently in the process of reconstruction. There's still quite a substantial number of buildings awaiting to find the funding for them and for them to be rebuilt and have their inhabitants come back.
We are now facing a unique opportunity to revitalize the impacted areas, including the rest of the city, in a participatory and inclusive way, bringing together professionals, academics, and certainly, most importantly, area residents.
هدفنا بمبادرة بيروت للتراث هو مش بس المحافظة على التراث المعماري والمباني المعمارية، إنما أيضاً المحافظة على النسيج الاجتماعي للمنطقة. نحن بصدد العمل على إعادة ترميم أبنية ضمن تجمعات لحتى نأمل إنه الحياة رح ترجع لهيدي الأحياء ولهيدي المدينة تقدر بيروت ترجع تنهض وتعيش.
We've got the will, we've got the know-how, but this massive project comes at a price. Unfortunately, a very small part of disbursed funds have been directed to the reconstruction of Beirut's built heritage. Till now, we still don't have the means to attain our crucial goal. We strongly believe that any socio-economic development and long-term impact is directly linked to the rehabilitation of these neighborhoods. It has definitely a multiplier effect.
خلال مهامي بوزارة الثقافة تسنى لي اطلع على أهمية التراث المعماري في لبنان عامة وفي بيروت خاصة، وضرورة المحافظة عليه لأسباب تاريخية معمارية جمالية واجتماعية. واشتغلت أنا وفريق عمل متطوع على هالأساس، ونصينا قانون موجود اليوم بمجلس النواب وبتمنى أنه يكرره.
About opportunities, and opportunity is a word that we have listened during this clip. You have talked about awareness that is important for the future of the city. So restoration is not only aiming at historical building, monuments, but to the diffuse heritage, what gives a city, a place, a citizen, his history and his life. So this reconstruction can be an opportunity. Of course, Italy will be part of this help, and the reason why the Lebanese delegation is here during the Restoration Week is because we are giving all our support, possible support to the reconstruction. So this opportunity can be for the near future a reconstruction of the city and also of the identity of Beirut.
It is a very big challenge. Beirut has been through many demolitions in its history. Even in recent history, we have seen just after the Civil War, the center of the capital was totally demolished to give way to a new reconstructed heart of the city that is actually a dead city. It has been built without any social concern, without any heritage layer, and with a totally neglect or reject of history and the multi-diverse population of the city and of the country. So the challenge here today is not to repeat this pattern. It's very important because when this center city was rebuilt in this totally absurd system where they brought in star architects from all around the world to build a center city that is like a catalog of diverse contemporary architecture, actually the population invested or invaded the old neighborhoods of the capital where all these traditions, the built heritage, but also the unbuilt heritage, all the human and social traditions of the city were still taking place, where we had many layers of social population with different social needs, different cultural needs as well, because Beirut is a multicultural city where you can speak many languages at the same time between Arabic, English, French, or Armenian. And even Jew at the time, Hebrew at the time. Unfortunately, not today. So these areas were hit by this blast. So the big concern we have today is to see a process like the one that was that has taken part in the center, the rebuilding of the center city of the war, of the city destroyed by the war, to take place in these areas that were hit by this terrible blast last year.
Thank you very much, Farhad. We will have the opportunity to talk about that also in Bari during the conference, the country conferences. Thank you very much. Let's come back to the Villa Galdi and to see another complexity in restoration. In Villa Galdi, we have seen the surroundings, but the reason why the restoration have started is the energy retrofitting and seismic retrofitting of the villa, which gave the economical opportunity of starting the restoration. Economic energy and seismic retrofitting are financed by the Italian government with a huge financing for this year and the next year. We call it 110% of refund in tax credit in 5 years. So a great, again, opportunity to start the revitalization and restoration of this villa in the surrounding of Naples and inside local neighborhood in Marigliano. So let's see in detail some part of the restoration.
Hello, I'm Guido, one of the members of the Galdi family. The palazzo where we are is Villa Galdi, so it's our namesake, and it was built at the end of the 1700s by a great-grandfather who was a nobleman and therefore decided to build the family palazzo. He decided it for Marigliano because this was well known, and it was behind Naples, and there was a spa town here very close by. Therefore, this was a privileged area for holidays. There were many divisions, many owners, but now, starting from my father, he purchased most of the shares from other relatives, and now it is us brothers who are managing this palazzo, and it's become a condominium, and we are trying to make it come back to life and to bring it back to its old form. I'm very proud to present this project, which has really cost us a lot of work. It's a complex job of our team. A structure such as this one requires great attention. It is a structure planned at times where there was no knowledge of the seismic risk, and therefore there are some shortcomings which need to be sorted. Furthermore, it was abandoned in the 80s. And here we have a project which entails a restoration and a requalification which is total in its approach. It was decided that the facade would be restored as well as all the shared parts. Furthermore, we will reclaim this edifice. There are no facilitations of a modern building, therefore all sorts of limitations and rules need to be respected, including the cladding and the walls and everything the superintendent provides for, because we are totally bound by these regulations. Such interventions are necessary also for the surrounding area because they show a way to follow in order to qualify and recuperate what belongs to our history.
So heritage and sustainability, climate change and the policies to let the process of sustainability to grow and how it can be applied on cultural heritage will be the focus of the conference at the opening of the exhibition, Salone del Restauro in Tour of Bari, that you can follow on Wednesday the 1st from 2:30 to 4. Gina Crevello, President of the Association for Preservation Technologies International, will be part of this conference, but today with her I would like to talk about the role of sustainability and heritage in the United States.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you for having APT present at the Restoration Week. In America, we don't have a requirement that buildings be energy retrofitted by law, but we are having more and more regulations where building owners will receive tax credits and they'll receive benefits to make their buildings more efficient. In about the 1980s, the Association for Preservation Technology, which is a historic preservation organization, realized that with the impact of climate change, we needed to work together to understand the impacts of the built environment on our carbon footprint, which again is also a European philosophy that the embodied energy within buildings that are already existing need to remain, because if we continue to build new, as we have so often in America, that we are impacting our environment significantly. So the two fields came together to develop a philosophy called sustainable preservation, where when we're looking at an existing building, we're trying to receive credits for the structure that's already there. So in some instances, you may get a credit for using a material that's more sustainable, such as bamboo floors, but you didn't get credit for the existing hardwood floors. So we have worked very diligently to try and allow the remaining structure to receive the credits. At the same time, we're also trying to look at net carbon, zero net carbon buildings, where new energy upgrades of existing structures and new buildings will have no impact on the environment. One of the things that we find is that the existing building today is more sustainable than the new building, because of that initial carbon impact is 30% times more greater if we're building new buildings. So we're working very hard, and particularly with our North American counterparts in Canada, to develop a North American approach.
Thank you very much, Gina. Last question, just a couple of words. In our mind, European mind, when we talk about United States, we think that the preservation of cultural heritage is a very small field of interest. As a conservation scientist and president of one of the biggest organizations in preservation in the world, what's your opinion?
Well, it's true we have a much shorter history, because we have a shorter history of historic building stock that has been reused. But in 1963, we lost one of our most famous buildings, Penn Central, which created a lawsuit against the United States government to be able to save and preserve historic buildings. So by 1964, preservation laws went into effect, and we can now landmark our buildings. Since that time, from 1964, the Columbia University graduate program in historic preservation and architectural conservation was developed, and shortly thereafter, the University of Pennsylvania created a program. In 1968, the Association for Preservation Technology was founded, where American counterparts would share our experiences with Canadians, because we don't have the history and the knowledge to work on buildings such as the European stock. So with that, we developed our international organization, which now has 22 chapters. We have 6 or 7 international chapters, of which one is EU, Europe, and Latin America, Australasia, South Asia, North America, and Canada.
Thank you very much, Gina. We are now rushing to the end, a little bit late than expected. So thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much to our guest for your patience. We will see tomorrow afternoon. We will be in Pompeii. The keyword will be value. The streaming will start as usual at 2:30 p.m. to 4 p.m. Again, I want to remember the next appointments that we have. Matera, Friday the 3rd, Ethics, and in Bari, Heritage and Sustainability on the 1st, and Knowledge for Restoration on the 2nd. The timing is always the same, 2:30 p.m. Follow us on our social, and please use our chat, there is the websites, to communicate with us, problems, but also to make challenges to me, to the Italian experts that we have been inviting, and to our guests present here in the delegation. Thank you very much for having been with us, and see you tomorrow. Thank you.